Okay, so, hey, hi, how's it going? It is approaching the end of March, and I figured I probably better ought to do a March wrap up. So, as with previous wrap ups, I do not have copies of many of these books because most of them are from the library and I no longer have them. Um, so, The first book that I read in March is Sorcery and Cecilia by Patricia C. Reed and Caroline Stevermer. This book was published, I think, in the late 80s or the early 90s. Yeah, it was published in the late 80s. And the conceit behind this book is I guess like Stevermer and Reed were like hanging out somewhere talking, and Stevermer mentioned when she was in high school, she and her friends used to play this game called the letter game, wherein they would conceive of characters, and then throughout the summer they would write to each other from the personas of their characters without really discussing like plot elements or any some such thing. And instead of Rumor's like recounting of this game, they usually ended prematurely when school started back up. But Reed was like, "That sounds dope. Can you and I do that?" And so they decided to set their little game in Victorian England, but with magic. And they also like barely touched up the plot at all. I think the only really conversation they had about plot was when Reed was like, "So I want to finish up my character story within like the next couple of letters. What are you thinking?" Yeah. So that's kind of like the conceit behind this book and how it was written. It definitely shows that they didn't really talk about the plot, but I don't think it really is bad. I mean like it feels very natural the way that the story evolves through the letters. The characters both have really strong voices. It's a really cute, unique story. It's just very lovely, and I loved it. And it reminded me quite a bit of like the like late 80s, early 90s like girl power wish fulfillment fantasy that I used to read when I was a kid. So I really enjoyed it. I think I gave it 4 stars. Yeah, so I gave that 4 stars. It was really fun. It was really fun. I really enjoyed it. Highly recommend it. Based on the reviews, I'm not going to continue with this series though. It seems like the rest of the series was conceived of differently and has a different tone to the first one. The next book that I read in March was Astro City Volume 1. You guys cannot see that. Anyways, Astro City Volume 1, Life in the Big City, by Kurt Busiek and Brenda Anderson. It did the art, and Alex Ross did the covers. This is a comic, obviously. Anyways, Astro City was a comic that first published in the late 90s by, I think, Image. I'm pretty sure it was Image. Although I think maybe Vertigo like bought the series. It's confusing. Anyways, but Astro City, Busiek's like core like thrust throughout the series is that he was interested in superhero stories, but he wasn't as interested in the superhero arcs as maybe other comics were. He was interested in how living in that world would affect the people who lived in these worlds. And yeah, so like Astro City, the artwork was beautiful, like hands down. That artwork was gorgeous. And the stories were really interesting. So I only gave it 3 stars on Goodreads because I'm not sure if it was the thing for me. I do think there were a lot of interesting things going on with the comic though, so I might continue with it. I didn't really like, enjoy it that much. Eh. The next thing that I read in March was actually I have here. So the next book I read was Unholy by Neil Shusterman. This is what my ugly ass copy looks like. So this is the second book in Shusterman's Unwind dystology. So if you're not familiar with Unwind, it is a dystopian novel first published in 2007, I believe. It is primarily concerned with the aftermath of this Heartland War that has taken place. Essentially, what has occurred is that the pro-life and the pro-choice movements in America eclipsed, ignited. There was this war, and the peace treaty that was eventually signed outlawed abortion, but allowed unwinding of children between the ages of 13 and 17. And so the process of unwinding is the process of slowly, bit by bit, pulling a child apart, limb from limb, and then using their limbs and tissues to medically support other citizens. So Unwind is a very, very heavy book. It deals with a lot of heavy topics, and it doesn't really have any answers. I really loved Unwind. I read Unwind when I was in high school. My friends read Unwind when we were in high school. Yeah, it was a thing when I was in high school, and then several years later, Schusterman comes out with 2, 3, and 4 in the series, and it definitely feels as though this book was conceived only because either Unwind was making Schusterman more money than his other books, or his publisher told him that there was like demand for more. I don't know, but this definitely feels like it was conceived afterward. So Unwind, in and of itself, Unwind was a complete story. It didn't leave off any threads that like weren't already meant to have been wrestled with by the reader themselves. And this book really feels as though it's artificially extending the life of the story and of the narratives of the characters, and this book introduces a couple of new characters who I don't think are super interesting. I mean, like, I guess like there's interesting ground to be covered with Cam. I just don't think Schusterman is going in the right direction with Cam. Yeah, so I think I gave this 2 stars because yeah, it was disappointing to me. It was not. I'm not fully sure if I think it was worth the time it took for me to read this. See, and the next book that I finished in March was Pride and Prejudice. Hold on. There we go. Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. So I actually listened to it. I listened to the version that Apple iTunes came out with a couple months back that was for free, narrated by Kate Beckinsale. Kate Beckinsale's narration, I think, was spot on. Yeah. So, Pride and Prejudice, as we all know, follows the plight of the Bennet sisters as their mother wants them all to get married and have husbands and homes so that when their father dies, they will all have places to live. Yeah, I mean, I don't really need to tell you this, do I? I started rereading Pride and Prejudice in January because I just watched the Lizzie Bennet Diaries on YouTube, and they were amazing. And I was like, I didn't know it was possible for me to love Lydia this much. I wonder if I could bring this interpretation back to the text. I really can't. There's really not much sympathy for Lydia in the text. But I enjoyed the reread anyways. I did finish out rereading it in time with Steve's mandatory Pride and Prejudice read along. Yeah, it's just how it goes. Yeah, so I give Pride and Prejudice 4 stars. Again, it's a very great book. It's awesome. It's just it just doesn't have whatever that special thing I feel books need to deserve 5 stars. Although it is one of my favorite books, so favorites and 5 stars are not necessarily synonymous, as far as I'm concerned. The next book. Anyway, I keep doing that, seeing the next book and then taking a drink of coffee, knowing that I'm gonna have to edit it out. Alright. The next book that I read in March is Boys That Bite by Mari Mancusi. Can you see that? I don't. Anyway, Boys That Bite by Mari Mancusi. This was also published, I think, 2006. I was going to say 2007. It was published in 2006. Okay. So Boys That Bite feels like it's sort of parodying the like vampire literature trends that have mostly come out in the decade like following its release. So I'm not sure what it was critiquing before then. Maybe there was enough vampire literature on the market pre-2006 for that sort of parody to really be warranted. I don't know. I was really paying attention in 2006 because I was like 11. Anyways, so this book follows a young girl named Sunny McDonald and her twin sister Rainey. Rainey is like sort of like a goth vampire wannabe, whereas Sunny is like a very like regular, preppy, prudish high schooler. And the story sets off when Rainey asks Sunny to drag her to this club bang on the outskirts of their town, where Rainey is anticipating being turned into a vampire. She has just completed a 3-month course to become a vampire. She has been on a waiting list for years, apparently, at 16. So anyways, they get there, and because they are twins, the vampire obviously mistakes Sunny for Rainey and bites Sunny instead of Rainey, and Sunny has some pretty strenuous yet vague objections to becoming a vampire, and the vampire who bit her, Magnus, vows to help her find a way to reverse her vampirism. They have a week in which to accomplish it, and they do so, over the course of which they fall in love. So it's very standard fare as far as vampire literature is concerned. Again, I think the thing that sparkles about this particular book is the vaguely parodic elements to it. So like, and what I mean by like this isn't vaguely parodic. This is like outright parodic. So the lore of Buffy the Vampire Slayer in this universe is literally true. I'm not sure how she managed this. I mean, I guess it kind of like fudges the line between like fan fiction and plagiarism and like fair use, I guess. Anyways, that the lore of Buffy the Vampire Slayer is literally true. There are vampire slayers, one girl. Each generation is chosen to slay the vampires. So like that part is true. The vampires are different, and the vampire lore is different, but the slayer lore is true. And so in like the middle of the book, Sunny and Magnus are accosted by Bertha the Vampire Slayer, and Magnus like starts telling Sunny about this like PR campaign that the vampires ran a few years back like vampires are real people too. We had pamphlets. We were talking about like the philanthropic aspirations of some of our like more distinguished members. We sent it over to the parent company Slayer Inc. and they didn't buy it. And then he also mentions that sympathizer Joss Whedon made out the Slayer to be so good and noble in that show, like vampires was like propaganda or something. It was very funny. It was very funny. Yeah. So I gave that 4 stars. I do have a like full review on Goodreads where I talk about more things. I will link that below if you want to read it, I guess. So next up, and I did not read these 2 back to back, but I have read them both in the last like week or so. I read Saga Volumes 1 and 2. These are rereads for me. I previously read, I'm pretty sure, the first 4 volumes of Saga. There are now 9 out, and I am rereading the first 4, and then I have the rest of them out from the library to catch up as well. Saga is dope. I don't know how else to talk about Saga other than it's like awesome. So Saga follows this warring alien nation. It's very hard to talk about. So there's this planet, and there is the moon that orbits it, and they both have native humanoid species to them. At some point in the past, the planet and its moon went to war with each other. Since then, their war has been exported to various other places throughout the galaxy, and the saga follows 2 members, each from the original warring species, who meet, fall in love, and have a child together, and they are now on the run, and it is it's awesome. It is NSFW. I honestly I don't know how to recommend Saga to anyone. It's good. It's good. Just go read it. And then the last thing that I read in March, and I actually read this completely within March. I started it in March and I finished it in March. Was The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter. So this book, I gave it 4 stars actually. It was not entirely what I expected. So I'm not entirely sure where I had gotten my impressions of The Bloody Chamber from, and I mean to an extent I suppose my impressions were true. It just they weren't true the way I expected them. So I had expected The Bloody Chamber to be some truly subversive retellings of these fairy tales. And to be clear, they are subversive retellings. They're just not surprising retellings. Like, I read the first 3 stories and I was like, these are all like exceedingly straightforward. Right? Like nothing occurred in any of the retellings that I wasn't like expecting from like, being someone who lives in the world. And upon reflection, so anyways, but in hindsight, I'm not sure how much of that is because fairy tale retellings since Angela Carter have been taking their cues from her work. I'm not sure. It was published in like the late 70s, early 80s, so it's entirely possible that I've just lived my entire life in the shadow of her fairy tale retellings. But no, once I got to like the 4th and the 5th stories in this volume, I realized what I should be reading them for, not necessarily for the retellings, because again, as I said, they were not surprising. I found them to be very straightforward. What you should go into this collection looking for is the prose. The prose is absolutely gorgeous. It's just beautiful. beautiful writing. Yeah, and again, like I said, I gave that 4 stars. So, yeah, and that's all that I have read so far in March. I am currently reading, like a million things, but I'm currently reading The Pisces by Melissa Lander. I'm about halfway through it. I'm a little over halfway through it. And there's like 2.5 days left in March, so I might finish this, but I'm also going back to work for the first day in months tomorrow. And yeah, so I don't know. We'll see. You'll probably know better than I will. That's all I really had to talk about. Bye-bye.